Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean. I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean. I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity, nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean.
Abraham Lincoln said, "You can fool all the people some of the time, most of the people, some of the people, most of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all of the time." Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program, the first and only program which is catered exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. This program is not suitable for everyone. It is a very interesting program. However, not everyone can follow this program. Now, there is a very simple way to find out whether you are one of the individuals who are to either watch this program live, or if you just happen to stumble on the video before you move forward, there is only a very simple way to find out whether you should continue watching the video, because the content of the program is not for everyone. Now let's get to it. Question number 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? Question number 2. Would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? If you have difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If your answer is yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. If you answer absolutely not to both questions, you should definitely stick around. We have a very special program for you, and we will get right to it in just a moment. But first, we will give you 1 minute to either close the video and move on to something else, or at this present moment, move on to something else, because this program may not be suitable for you. Here we go. Let's find out. Hello again, I am MD and this is the 4th branch program. If you are still here, it is safe to conclude you are an individual of some level of decency. In the beginning of this program, we usually warn individuals who do not have any level of morality, any decency, because this program is not catered for any of those individuals. As mentioned in the beginning of this program, it is catered exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Today we have a very special program, and as you already seen on the screen, a news update that the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh has been cancelled. I know the minute that you look at that on your screen, you scramble on the internet to find out where else are you able to find detail about this program. Fortunately, we do have detail that you may not be able to find anywhere else. But the update that you're currently looking on the screen is absolutely correct. But before we get to that point, let's take a look at a few things that pretty much going on in this world. People travel all around the world to come to the United States. Now, there are many categories of people who come to the United States. Some people come for financial reasons. Some people come because they are being persecuted in their own countries. And some of you are here because your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, or even your ancestors came to the United States a very long time ago, and you have been, your roots are pretty much here. You may not even know anywhere else in the world, especially if you do not travel. But even if you do, you visit many different parts of the world, and as much as there are beauties here in the United States, many cities, many monuments, rivers, parks, it is beautiful. Some people make it almost a lifestyle to travel. There are families or individuals, even single people who travel around the world, would not let 1 year go by without traveling somewhere to see the beauty of nature, to see other wonders of the world. So it goes, a lot of people come right here in the United States of America, also to see beauties, to see rivers, to see parks, to see monuments, to understand the history of the country. But through centuries, millennia even, there has been a very big difference between people traveling to other parts of the world to see beauties, to see the nature, and coming right here in the United States of America. And the major difference is a number of people who come here are more inclined to stay. The question is why? Why, indeed, a number of people, I would say across the world, no matter where they come from, whether their countries have a system of democracy, their country have a lot of natural beauties, and yet they come to the United States and they stay, and sometimes they stay very long. Sometimes they extend their visa, and they at times end up getting the label illegal immigrants. So of course, some people just come here illegally to stay. Some people come on vacation, but they stay beyond their vacation time. and they decide not to go back to their country. And that observation get us to think as to why do people do that. Obviously, there are other countries that has happened as well, but not with the frequency of being right here in the United States of America. No matter what the reason people come here, whether it's for vacation, whether it's just to relax, to get an education, whatever the case is, for a reason that sometimes we don't even care to find out. But we know, we have the stat, we have the information, we have the data that a lot of people from the world across come to the United States and decide to stay. Yes, some leave their countries with the intention of coming here and stay permanently. They come with a resident visa. Those are people from the onset that decide from their country, go through the whole process that's established by the United States for that particular country, and they meet the requirement and they come here with the intention of staying here or making a life right here in the United States. The bulk of the people who come here in the United States, whether with a residence visa, whether on vacation, whether to simply for studies. In fact, the United States of America has produced a lot of intellectuals across the world, head of states, president, prime ministers, generals, governors, secretaries, you name it. People come right here in the United States for all sorts of reasons. Now, even when they leave the country, when they leave the United States, they go back to their countries because sometimes they come to study, to get a degree, because they value the information, the education they get right here in the United States. And the reason for that is because no matter where they go, no matter where they come from, once they get an education in the United States and they go back to their country, their respective countries, they are welcome. Their education is well regarded because they got it from the United States of America. But the story doesn't end right there, because if that were to be the case, as you're seeing in the video in front of you, if that were to be the case, when someone comes on vacation, then they go back home, then that would be just it, because they would visit the next country and the next country and the next country. But what stats have provided us is the fact that even when those individuals who have visited the country, for whatever the reasons is, education, vacation, etc., there is a very high level of probability that they will come back to the United States, sometime for vacation again, sometime to just stay permanently. So in contrast with all other countries in the world, people are more inclined to come here and stay here. But we have found out why. And the main reason, the primary reason that they do that, is not just because of the financial opportunities that the country offers. Yes, there is that too, because most people have left their countries, their respective countries, they come here, and eventually their financial situation have changed. They may have nothing back in their countries. They may have struggled financially, but the minute they come here in the United States, things change. However small those changes are, things change for them financially. In fact, even head of state, allies of the United States of America, when their public career is over, when they're done, whether prime minister, president, etc., they are very likely to come and even retire right here in the United States. The United States is a heaven even for most of the people in the world. Now, even countries where governments which are not allies of the United States, we call them enemies. Even those people, the individual, not the head of state, not the public official, but even the people, for instance, if we take the case of Iran, for instance, during the time that the Bush administration was waging war with Iraq, and of course the United States has been waging war across the Middle East, and Iran has been one of the countries. And despite the fact that their government has been waging war with the United States, which means the US and Iran, if we take it at the government level, they are not seeing eye to eye. And yet, the people, the Iranian people, they yearn to come to the United States. So there is a certain attraction about the United States. Now, here is the main reason. No matter what other factors drive people to come here to the United States, the reason when they come here, they more likely to stay than if they go, for instance, to Spain or to England or to Australia, to any of those countries that have also a system of democracy. Now, if they were just after the system of democracy, when they go to France, they go to Spain, they go to Italy, they go to UK, it's not that they don't stay, but according to data, it is more likely that those individuals would come to the United States and stay. There is a higher percentage of those people who do those kind of things. So there is a reason, and here it is. Now, in order to understand what I'm about to say, I'll give you a very interesting example of something that happened right here in the United States. During the Bush administration, George W. Bush that is, while his administration was waging war against the Taliban, something drastic happened. And most unfortunately, whenever our government, even without our consent as we the people, go and wage war across the world, a number of people in the countries that are being attacked by the United States government, a number of people, innocent people, end up becoming victims of those wars. Something similar happened during the Bush administration, when there was a very aggressive campaign by the intelligence agencies to, especially when it comes to Afghanistan. Remember that the attack on American soil on 9/11/2011 occurred and attributed to Osama bin Laden, who happened to have holed up in Afghanistan. And even according to information, data, video, and so on, intelligence information, Osama bin Laden was stationed in Afghanistan and found a welcome reception from the Taliban at that time. So when 9/11 happened, the Bush administration, or at least the people who were tasked for the security of the United States, they went to Afghanistan and they did something that, in the name of we, the people of this nation, they rounded up almost every single man who was, I shouldn't even say men, I would say young men, 16, 15, 16 years old and older. And this is not a story. This is a fact that most of those men, especially in the very vicinity of Islamabad, they rounded all those men. Women were spared because it looks like, by all accounts, information, that they were as innocent as a child. They didn't know what was going on, or sometimes they just find themselves embroiled in situation they weren't looking for, they didn't ask for. So the United States of America went to Afghanistan and rounded almost every young man. Those who did not have time to escape, they rounded everybody. Now, I'm not here to tell you a story about the war. I'm not here to tell you a story about Afghanistan, but I want you to understand why so many people from the world across come to the United States and what they have in mind when they come and why they want to stay, even after suffering in the hands of our government. So in the process of taking all those men, our government either interviewed some of them on the spot, and some of them end up being tortured to the point of being killed, no kidding. And those who survive after torture, especially those who are somewhat older, starting at 18 years of age, they took all of them and they transported them to Guantanamo. Now, the story is sad enough to make you feel that why in the world do we let our government do those kind of things? Granted, we were scared because 9/11 was not a small event. That wasn't a small tragedy for the United States. That was the first time in the United States something so big and tragic happened. So everybody was scared. So we pretty much give the government a blank check to do whatever it takes to keep us safe. So the government used that blank check and indiscriminately went to Afghanistan, rounded all the young men, and brought them in very inhuman way, I might add, to Guantanamo. But there is one particular story, and that's the reason I bring that story forth. There is one particular story that is of importance for our conversation today. there was one of those young men they captured, and it so happened that years before the 9/11, that gentleman was right here in the United States. He was in the United States studying. He went to universities here in the United States. If I'm not mistaken, he spent either 3 or 4 years here. So when this whole thing was happening, and it was happening extremely fast because all the young men were being literally yanked from their families by intelligence agents to be transported to Afghanistan. That young man that I just mentioned, unfortunately, I don't recall his name. He said to his brother, he has a brother who also was yanked from the family. And he reassured his brother. He said, don't worry, it's just a misunderstanding. Once we get to America, this whole thing will be sorted out and we will be released. Now, I want you to understand the interesting aspect of why people leave their countries and come to the United States. It's not just to visit the beautiful sites. There are plenty. It's not just to see the rivers, the parks, the monument. There are beautiful of those as well. But something more important brings them, attracts them right here in the United States of America. And this is more important. This is a bigger focus for the people who leave their countries to come to the United States. Yes, they admire the monument. They like the rivers. They like going to Washington to see the beauties. But this is not the primary reason that people come to the United States. As I mentioned earlier, they come to visit. But there is a much bigger reason, a much more important reason they come here in the United States, and they want to stay. That gentleman from Afghanistan, now he's being yanked, and by yank I don't mean can you please get in the truck. I'm not talking about they just say we're going with you, we need you. They literally they put a bag over their head, a black cover bag over their head. You cannot breathe properly. You don't even know what's going on. It's like if you were to wake up in the middle of the night and you hear a bang on the door, that alone would have startled you. Now forget about that. Now in the middle of the night you have a bunch of well-armed people coming, break down the door, not knocking at the door, breaking down the door and yank you out of your bed in pajamas, maybe even naked. Didn't even give you a chance to get dressed, just yank you out of your bed. And if you were to be married or if you had a girlfriend, they yank your hands from the bed and they literally toss you into a truck. This is the United States government abroad, and that's how the government that we give power to do those kind of things, because we say we'd like to be safe, but at the same time we do not have any control over what they do overseas. Now, if you want to understand why people from the world across want to hurt America, this is a story that you need to investigate further. But again, as I say, I'm not here to talk about that because this is not the story. The story is about trying for you to understand why people, despite of all those things that are happening to them, they come to the United States and they want to stay. Yes, financial reason, they come here, they like it. They come here to see the beauty. But the reason is in that story that I just gave you. That young man who told his brother, Don't worry. I know it's tough. I know we're being mistreated. I know this is a misunderstanding, because in America, when we get there, things will be sorted out and we will be released. This is a very telling story, a very lovely story. It is the story of America, that people who come to visit, people who come to study, people who come to see the beauties, this is what they live with. That gentleman came to the United States to study, left, go back to his country, and here's something that happened. Something bad, something terrible. He was being mistreated. Not just he and his brother were yanked from their families, tossed into a truck, bound, hand, chain on their feet, bound, put in a chopper, take to Guantanamo. That was in the most inhuman way possible. Yes, our government say we are doing things to keep you safe, and in the process they picked up a number of innocent people. Some of them are lucky enough they survived. They mistreated them, they killed them, all in the name of keeping us safe. Now, fortunately for those two gentlemen that I just mentioned, they did survive. In fact, I would say 4 or 5 years, or it could be 7 years ago, they gave an interview on NPR. And that was heart-wrenching because of the fact that the story that I just mentioned to you, the story that the guy told his brother not to worry about because it will be sorted out, guess what? He and his brother spent a lifetime in Guantanamo. So the story didn't end badly, but it didn't end too well either, because he spent a lifetime in Guantanamo being tortured to tell a story that he didn't have. Because he didn't know Bin Laden, he wasn't involved in terrorism, but he went through the same torture as the rest of those people, because our government wanted anyone to say, yes, we were part of it. So that gentleman ended up living to tell the story. He and his brother were mistreated in Guantanamo, even though he had no part in what happened on 9/11. The bottom line is, the story he told his brother is the reason that most people left left their countries. That's the reason most people end up coming to the United States for visit, for study, for anything. But they come back because they believe, as that gentleman did, when you are in the United States of America, things are sorted out. No matter how bad it looks, but because this is a system of democracy, eventually things will sort out and we will be released. That's what he said to his younger brother. Don't worry, things will sort out. When I come back, we will tackle the second part of this conversation, basing the system that we have here, using that as the foundation to talk about why the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh has been canceled. Because this story that I just gave you, this story is not a fairy tale, is something that happened. to a family in Afghanistan that suffered greatly in the hands of our government. They didn't die, they were tortured, they were humiliated, but one of them who came to the United States prior, learned the system of democracy we have here. In other words, the system of justice we have right here in the United States. And those people, that gentleman, believe the minute he got transferred, he and his brother got transferred, taken to the United States, things will be sorted out and we will be released. That was a wonderful thought to have about a country. Don't worry, brother. As soon as we get to the United States of America, things will be sorted out and we will be released. I'll be right back. Donald Trump is wrong to call the media the enemy of the country. Adolf Hitler did exactly the same thing in 1933. Journalists are not in the business of fairness. Our business, our only business, is to be objective. It is our duty to hold Trump and every administration accountable. Today, it is urgent, it is necessary, it is critical. Our very freedom depends on it.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like his handling of the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
Don't go anywhere. The fourth branch program will return in just a moment.
Now, baby, you're casting your spell on me. I say, now, baby, you're casting your spell on me. My baby's casting spells on me. Action! Wayfair, you got just what I need. Everything for my home, you got it for me. I never see selection quite like this. Every color and size in my mind. They got every single thing on my list. And with 70% off, who knows what I'll find. Wayfair, you got just what I need. Everything for my home, you got it for me. Wayfair, and the shipping was free. Now my home's the home I want.
From all of us at Wayfair, find what you need today.
The reason people from the world across travel to the United States of America for visit, for study, for health, for whatever the reason is, and decide to stay is because there is a system of government, a system of democracy that they like, that guarantees them, no matter how bad things look, it will be resolved properly. And the reason that is because we have a system of law. We call it the rule of law, which states that everybody, including the President of the United States, everybody is under the law. And because of that, no matter what your social status is, no matter where you're from, no matter your race, religion, if you are right here in the United States of America and something that has to do with the law happens, you can almost rest assured it will be resolved. Now, in the example that I just gave you, the gentleman did spend quite some time in Guantanamo unjustly, but in the end, it was resolved. Of course, he would feel differently because of all the time that he had spent there for no reason whatsoever. So when that aspect of life in the United States is over, if it is no longer true that people can come to the United States and to be assured things will sort out, not only they will no longer come, but the country will no longer be a country in which we would want to raise our children, our grandchildren. For the past couple of decades, the erosion of us, the erosion of democracy in the United States has been pretty obvious. Now, the framers of the constitutions knew what they were doing. They weren't perfect, but they knew what they were doing. Both the executive branch and the legislative branch are political branches. Now, they did put a lot of trust on people's decency, on patriotism. So when they crafted that constitution, they could not, because they all were patriots. They left England. They left a system where kings, emperors were the one running their lives. They didn't have any say over their own lives. Now, they created a country, they created a form of government which would be very different, which would be just the opposite of what they left behind. Because in a kings and emperors, whatever they said goes. If they say to kill an individual, nobody asks question. If they say to arrest an individual, nobody asks question, because whatever the king, the queen, the emperor, whatever they said at that time, their people who serve who serve them, their subordinates have to carry out whatever their wishes were. In fact, we even have a passage in the Bible where, according to that passage, that one of the sin was someone asking the king for the head of a prophet. But because the king had full power, and they said, according to the story, the king was saddened, but the king had wanted to please a lady. So the head of John the Baptist was brought to the king on a platter. You can believe or not believe the story, but that's not really the point. So the framers of the Constitution knows that both the executive branch and the legislative branch would be very much involved in a lot of politics. So what they did is they make it such that they can hash out those details with the people. So we elect president, we elect senators, we elect congressmen, but we do not elect judges. That's the judiciary branch. The judges are appointed by the president. And they were also smart enough to give the president that kind of power, but also to remove and try to detach the judges from the executive branch. And the way that they did that is by saying that when you elect a judge in the Supreme Court, you elect a judge for his or her lifetime. So in other words, that individual, once elected, should not have to go back to that individual who sits in the Oval Office and try to return favor to that individual. And the reason that a judge was spared from the political sin of election is because, as you can see, senators, congressmen, president, there are a lot of corruption. And today, especially today, when you look at the amount of corruption in those two branches of our government, to expose judges in that system of corruption would have made our system of democracy not any better than any third world country. So the framers of the Constitution say, and they actually had the right idea. The president elected by the people, however, the legislative branch, both houses, Congress and the Senate, they have a certain degree of control over the executive branch because the executive branch comes from the population, civilian. Anybody can run for president as long as you meet only the very simple criteria. Really, there are not a lot of requirements for being president. You have to be a US born citizen. You have to have been in the country for your life, or at least not be outside the country. I don't remember exactly if it's 20, 30 plus years. And of course, you have to be at least 35. So the requirements are not, they're not that many requirements for anybody to run for president. We have the example right here in the United States now. Trump was never a politician. He ran for president, he became president of the United States. So especially at the time that the framers of the Constitution were crafting our Constitution, they know that there was a possibility that you could have someone who become president and that person would be a rogue agent, would be an agent of a foreign government. In that case, they were only looking at England, but they know that possibility existed, and that this person who becomes president could be unfit to be president. They have all that addressed in the Constitution. what I believe, and I said that several times, that the framers of the Constitution must have not thought about at least a couple of things. Number one, that the legislative branch would at some point go to a single political party. That's number one. And number two, that people who serve in those two houses would be taking action that are completely unpatriotic. And I think they base the decision or thinking that everybody who is an American citizen who is going to serve as a congressman or a senator, that individual would undoubtedly a patriot. I think they didn't foresee that there could be individual sitting, an individual who becomes a senator or a congressman or even a president who would not be a patriot. I think they may have thought of a president being in that category. But I don't think, even if they thought that could have been the case, because they had structured three equal branches of government, independent of each other, which means the president doesn't tell Congress what to do. The president doesn't tell the Senate what to do. The president doesn't tell the Supreme Court what to do. Once the president appoints a justice, that's the end of the story. That's the end of the line. At least that's the way the framers of the Constitution intended it to. But unfortunately, as you can see, we have, first of all, a president of the United States. The first thing that happened to someone who becomes president of the United States is to swear, to take an oath of office, to uphold the Constitution of the United States. That's the first thing that happened. Raise your hand and repeat after me. That's the first thing that happened. No matter where you stand today in terms of support, which political party you belong to, if you are a sound-minded individual, you know that the protect our Constitution is not something that in Donald Trump playbook. That is of no importance to him. You may like it, but I'm referring to individual, sound-minded individual. That's why I said from the very beginning of this video that it is not for everyone, because the purpose of the fourth branch is to try to get to a perfect union, and I cannot rely on an individual, or the country cannot rely on individuals who are not sound-minded. So we know that the idea of upholding the Constitution of the United States, the idea of protecting our Constitution, this is not being done by the President of the United States. But what is worse is the fact that we also know that the legislative branch, who unfortunately is led today by Republicans, both houses, both the Congress and the Senate, are led by the Republican Party. And any sound-minded American would say that they are not fulfilling the task for which they were elected. Yes, you may like it because it may serve your purpose. You may like it because, well, I like the idea that they are not paying attention to the Constitution. I like the idea that they just trampling our Constitution. But as I always say to everyone who seem to think it's okay for Republicans to do that, would you feel the same way when the shoe is on the other foot? Now, if not, that means you at least are sound-minded and you realize the problem, and doing nothing is not acceptable. Because if you believe that it's not good for the country, or it would have not been good for the country had the Democrats be in that predicament and doing what Republicans are currently doing, that would be bad for our country, that would be mean trampling our Constitution, then you cannot be okay with the Republicans doing it if you believe it's wrong. And unfortunately, that's what's going on. Now, the reason that part is also important, it's because we call, the framers of the Constitution call the houses the legislative branch. It's because laws in the country come from the legislative branch. Laws that you've seen in the country. When blacks were slaves, when the emancipation occurred, when civil rights were passed, and so on, everything started in the legislative branch. Granted that whatever document that legislative branch comes with has to go to the president's desk to be signed. So the framers of the Constitution wanted a certain collaboration between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Congress come with something, whatever that is, passes it, it goes to the Senate. The Senate look at it, likes it, doesn't like it. If the Senate doesn't like it, they make some correction, they suggest some correction, and they send it back to Congress, which will implement those, whatever the Senate wants. Or sometimes Senate only wants to add something to it, but would send it back to Congress so that they can agree to it, or even remove whatever that they said before, and they will send it back to the Senate again. And after it passes back and forth between those two sides, once everything is per the two houses, then it will go into the president's desk, who will sign it or not, because the president may decide not to. That's when the idea of the president veto a bill, which means the houses pass whatever that is. I'll give you an example. For instance, the tax cut. The houses could have passed the tax cut because everything originated there. Congress, Senate, Congress, Senate, and then when they send it to the president's desk, the president would have said, no, I'm not signing it. In fact, we have a similar example during the Obama administration, where Congress and Senate, which were also in the hands of the Republican, they passed a bill to try to kill Obamacare. So, of course, when they sent it to Obama's desk, it would not go anywhere because the president has the veto power. No, that bill is not going anywhere. Now, without having to give you to go through a study of the Constitution, the president veto a bill, but if the Senate can manage to get 2/3 of its members, they can pass that bill. Meaning that the president could have said, in the case of Obama, Obama vetoed a bill that the Senate sent to him about killing Obamacare. But if the Republican could gather 2/3 of the Senate to go along with the idea of killing Obamacare, they could have easily done that without the president. So the executive branch and the legislative branch work together, and we have laws in this country. Now, the executive branch is supposed to enforce the law. So whatever law, despite the fact that whatever act is going to go to the president, to the executive branch to be signed, but once it is signed, it becomes law, then now the executive branch job is to make sure that that law is enforced. And it so happens the executive branch has the Department of Justice to do that for him. So where does the justice comes into the picture? The justice is appointed by the president. So the president decides to pick someone. Well, not just anybody on the street. The person has to meet qualification necessary to become a justice. Not that it matters nowadays, because we have an instance of a nominee that actually went through the Congress and the Senate, an individual who became a judge in the United States of America who has never even tried a case. In a normal administration, that would have never happened. But remember, the White House is occupied by a Republican. Both houses, Congress and the Senate, belong to the Republican. Now, the framers of the Constitution never seen that. I don't think they saw that coming. How could you have a judge, someone who's going to make decisions that impacts people's lives, know nothing about the law? Has never tried a case. I never represented anybody. It's someone who simply has a law degree, no experience whatsoever. But because both Congress and the Senate are led by the Republican, Trump appointed the individual and they just put the person through. And that's what is actually being done. And why should it be of concern to you? Why should it be of concern to you? Or can you see why it should be of concern to you? Well, it should be of concern to you because someone sitting on the court who is making decision not just about your lives, but about the whole nation's lives, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids. That individual cannot just be anybody. You cannot just put anybody there, not because the person is a Republican, not because the person is leaning Republican. You cannot just decide to put just anybody on the court. Stay with me. I'll be right back. So, what are we talking about? Donald Trump appointed Brett Kavanaugh as the Supreme Court nominee to replace Kennedy, who announced his retirement a few months ago. Now, there is nothing mysterious about a president appointing individuals who are leaning a certain way. In fact, the court has always been, the way that president has throughout the existence of this republic, despite the fact that the judiciary branch, which is the Supreme Court, the way that Supreme Court justices have been appointed over the years, over decades, I should say, since the existence of the republic, the president, whoever sits in the Oval Office, would pick someone who more or less represent the views of the political party that president belongs to. In other words, you would be hard-pressed to find that a Republican president go as far as appointing a Democrat justice. Not that it hasn't happened. If you remember that Obama appointed Merrick Garland, who is not a Democrat. He's kind of what people call a moderate Republican. So Democrats have done that, but Republicans have never done any such thing. So to keep the story moving, that the individual who sits in the Oval Office, the president, would almost always appoint a justice who is leaning towards the views of the party in which that president belongs. So over the existence of the United States, that's what has happened. Now, Democrats have complained when Republicans appoint someone they consider extreme. Republicans have complained when Democrats appoint someone who is extreme. And in both houses, both members of both houses have played hardball with the nominee. Sometimes they drag the process on and on and on until the nominee may get tired of it and then just drop his running for that particular seat, that nomination. Sometimes it's because of something that comes, some revelation of some bad behavior on the part of the nominee. Now, usually, the president team will vet the nominee before the president appoints that individual. Vetting means that they will go through the process of finding out everything that they can find out about that individual before the president present that individual as the next justice. That's the way the process works. In other words, a president, first of all, the president would not want his nominee not to be confirmed. So the president will do the initial legwork to make certain that when the president, for instance, appointed Merrick Garland to become the next justice to replace Antonin Scalia, he did his homework by saying, okay, we found that that individual called Merrick Garland, he passed all background check in with flying colors. Now, that wasn't of any good to Barack Obama, because the Republican, who at that time were also leading both the Congress and the Senate, they simply say no. Mitch McConnell say right out of the bat, we're not even going to listen to that guy. Now that's another aspect of the problem which we do not care to talk about. But in general, that's the way it goes. President pick someone, have the person gone through a background check, present that person to the legislative branch for confirmation. In general, the senators, whoever sits in the judicial committee, I should say, would ask that individual enough question to understand where that individual is coming from. And sometimes they ask questions that are totally irrelevant, but they just want to drag out the nomination of that individual. In other words, they try to wear that individual out. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, unfortunately, what has happened, we are in a completely different era, in which the President of the United States is himself under scrutiny for having done a number of outrageous things in his life, in his private life. Now went out of his way to nominate someone who seemed to be also under similar scrutiny. We are talking about Brett Kavanaugh. Because both the Congress and the Senate belong to the Republicans, even if there are things that are bad about Brett Kavanaugh to become the next Supreme Court nominee, because, which I mentioned earlier, that the fact that now, because the framers of the Constitution did not foresee that we would have a legislative branch who comprises individuals who are not patriotic. So there is nothing in the Constitution that could be used to remedy such situation. So Donald Trump decided to pick Brett Kavanaugh not out of the blue, but because Donald Trump is currently going through a situation where he needs someone like Brett Kavanaugh to get him out of that jam. And the situation, we already know about it, is he is under investigation by the special counsel. And because he's under investigation, he wants to be sure that whoever he puts on the Supreme Court is going to be on his side. And Brett Kavanaugh has all the characters of a justice who would not necessarily go with what the precedent is, but rather would return a favor to Donald Trump. How do we know? How can we possibly know that? How can we possibly know that Brett Kavanaugh, once placed on the Supreme Court, is not going to return the favor? Well, the answer, Brett Kavanaugh gave us that answer. Number one, Brett Kavanaugh has made a number of, has written articles, opinions, has given interviews, and in all of the cases, he suggests that the President of the United States cannot be subpoenaed, should not have to answer to a special counsel, and even went as far as saying that the President may even have the power to end an investigation that is being conducted against him. So Donald Trump bypassed everybody else and laser focus on Brett Kavanaugh to help him out, because on the Supreme Court, his vote is going to change everything. But I'm not here to talk about that aspect of Brett Kavanaugh, because although the framers of the Constitution wanted to separate the judiciary branch from the other two branches, meaning they're not supposed to be involved in politics. They're not supposed to be involved in politics at all. That's why, number one, they are appointed for a lifetime, meaning once they're on the bench, they're supposed to conduct themselves as wise men and women to help advance or at least improve the country in a legal way, so to speak. Because justices, Supreme Court justices, they have the last word on anything. Whatever they say, if a case is brought to the Supreme Court and they say left, it's left. There is nowhere else to turn. So a justice word weighs tons. It's more important than even the words of the President of the United States. So while we tend to think that if Democrats are in power, they appoint someone who is Democrat leaning, and when Republicans are in power, they appoint someone who is Republican leaning, we, the people, should be involved and concerned about those activities, because they're not just going to affect our lives today. They're going to affect lives for generations to come. Today, the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh, if confirmed, would affect even our grandchildren. So, to just because Brett Kavanaugh is against LGBT and you think this is great. So what happened beyond that? And I realize that's what happened to a lot of people who today get on the bandwagon and asking their congressmen, their senators to vote a certain way because they cannot or do not or don't care to think or look beyond where they are at. The time that they live today, they don't care to look beyond that time. So their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, lives don't matter to them. But if you are a sound-minded individual, and which you should be, because if you stay to watch this video or watch this presentation today, it's because you have answered the question that you know what's good for you. You have a certain level of decency. And if that's the case, the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh should be of grave concern to you. And here's the reason. First, someone who's going to sit on the Supreme Court must be an individual of impeccable character. We cannot make excuses for people. The executive branch and the legislative branch are politics. We have crooks, corrupt individual. We have currently a president of the United States who is under investigation. So we have crooks and corrupted system of those two branches. And the only reason that we seem to have a little bit of hope left is because we still have a Supreme Court justice that still has a certain level of decency, a certain level of integrity. It has its flaws, and we do have today a member of the justice, Clarence Thomas, who was under suspicion of not having enough integrity. And guess what? At that time, it was up to the Republican to stop Clarence Justice Thomas from being on the Supreme Court. A man with dubious characters, with dubious corrupt personality, and someone who practiced sexual harassment in the workplace. And guess what? Republican did not heed anything and just push Clarence Thomas into the Supreme Court. And here we are again, 27 years later, Republicans, without learning any lesson, want to push Brett Kavanaugh into the Supreme Court. And this time, the reason it should be of concern to you is because if the Supreme Court, if we lose trust in the Supreme Court, because as far as the legislative branch and the executive branch, we already lost trust in those two branches of government, because it's a bunch of politician crooks who are taking money from lobbies, from special interest group. And now we know, we have proof that even the President of the United States took money from foreign government involving in our system of government. So it is over for the executive branch and the legislative branch. This is over. This is corruption at the highest level of our government. So the only branch that seems to still have a certain level of decency is the judiciary branch. We cannot, just for the sake of satisfying some stupid craving that we have, some temporary craving that we have for some temporary thirst for something, that we want to place another individual of dubious character into the Supreme Court. And again, it's the Republican going back to it. Now, you can tell me whatever you want, but it is becoming a pattern. It has become, it's almost like Republicans live for doing those kind of things. Destroy our institution. It is the Republicans who are currently helping Donald Trump derail an investigation to protect our nation. Devin Nunes, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, Trey Gowdy. It is the Republicans today who are behind pushing, doing everything humanly possible to push Brett Kavanaugh into the Supreme Court. It's like they do not have any decency. They do not care about how that impacts our country, how that impacts our Constitution, how that impacts the very institution called the Supreme Court. They just do not care. So today, it turns to us, we the people, to prevent that from happening. Now, if that sounds like a bunch of ranting, let's take a quick look. You may not remember the situation about where we at with Brett Kavanaugh. Now let me give you a quick recap. 3 weeks ago, the Republican with Chuck Grassley as the chairman of the Judicial Committee, who is to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, use every tool is in arsenal to make certain that Brett Kavanaugh becomes the next Supreme Court justice. The reason that they can assure that is because Republicans are in the majority. Now, 3 weeks ago, something happened. A bombshell was dropped that an individual, Christine Blasey Ford, accused Brett Kavanaugh of having sexually assaulted her. Now, in a world where the individual who are responsible, especially the chairman, for the confirmation of a nominee accused of sexually assaulting someone, the first thing that that individual would have done is stop the process and investigate the claim. That if you had a chairman of the Judicial Committee who had any string of decency, that's the first thing that would have happened. Now, do you know what Chuck Grassley said the minute that claim came out? A vote was supposed to happen on Thursday, and Chuck Grassley came out, gave a press conference, and said the vote is still going to happen. Now, if you are a Republican and you're looking forward for Brett Kavanaugh to become the next justice, you may think this is great, this is fine. It is not fine, no matter where you stand, because if you have a chairman of the Judicial Committee, someone who's supposed to oversee those kind of things, and this is the individual at that, who is an older man, who is supposed to have a little bit of wisdom. Now you just heard that the nominee was accused of sexually assaulting someone, and the next thing that comes to your mind is, we're going to go forward anyway. That means that doesn't matter. That should give you pause. As a citizen in this country, that should give you pause, because it's not just the president of the United States who is corrupt. It's not just the president who is a crook. It's not just the president who is under investigation, but you have members in the Republican Party who seem to have no sense of decency. So the first thing that came out of the chairman's head is, we're just going to go and do it anyway, because it doesn't matter that the candidate was accused of sexually assaulting someone. We're not for anything. Well, we have crooks in the White House. We have people doing insider trading. We have people stealing the government. So what the hell about putting another crook under Supreme Court justice? There is nothing wrong with that. We're a bunch of crooks. So why not put another crook someplace else where we know when something comes up and the Supreme Court has to rule on it, then we know we have a crook on the Supreme Court that will rule on our favor. That's pretty much what we're hearing from those individuals sitting, trying to confirm a Supreme Court justice who is going to spend a lifetime on the Supreme Court, saying it's okay. It is not okay. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, that should trouble you, that you don't have anybody that represents you that have any sense of decency. Now, Chuck Grassley was not the only one. Orrin Hatch, who also is an elder gentleman there, and he was there during the Anita Hill confirmation hearing for the confirmation of Clarence Thomas. He came out, instead of shutting his big mouth and wait for investigation, he said, that woman must be mixed up. I don't believe that. Now, those were the two biggest voices who happen to be not only older individuals who should have wisdom to understand those things, but on top of that, they both were there at the time that Clarence Thomas was accused of sexually harassing someone, and was there and saw how the process went. And on top of that, they did not learn anything, and their first reaction is, let's just move forward with that process. But you know what was even worse than those two individuals behaving that way? And members of the Republican Party who cannot see that it is a problem to have members of your party with no sense of decency. And even if they didn't have any decency, but at least would have some logic to understand that in order to place the nominee on the Supreme Court, at least some semblance of investigation should happen. But instead, the chairman, which means you give that individual a little bit more wisdom than the rest. That chairman is the one that came out and said, no, we're moving forward. The Republican Party, members in the Republican Party, sound-minded members in the Republican Party should be ashamed of the individual who represent them. But what was even worse than members in the Republican Party doing that is the individual who is named to become the next Supreme Court nominee, who doesn't even have the wisdom to demand that an investigation be done so that this matter can be put to rest. I can tell you personally, I would be afraid to have somebody like that rule or give opinion on any matter that impact me, that impact my children, eventually my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, because someone, a judge who is accused of having sexually assaulted someone. Now, I'm not here to tell you it happened or didn't happen. This is not my argument here. And I'm in no position to prove or disprove either. But what I'm here to talk about is the fact that you have a judge, someone who has already climbed the ladder of being in the Circuit Court of Appeal, the one just under the Supreme Court, just one step below the Supreme Court. That individual doesn't have the wisdom when that accusation comes forth to say, hey, let's stop that nomination. Let's stop that process. Let's go and have this thing cleared up. But instead, he's trying to collaborate with Chuck Grassley and company and to get the process moving. I can tell you, I don't have any trust on somebody like that. And I would not rest to make certain that someone like that doesn't get into the Supreme Court, because someone who doesn't have a judge who is sitting currently on the Supreme Court, on the Court of Appeal in the District of Columbia, who doesn't have the wisdom enough to call for a timeout to clear that matter. If it's not you, your kids, your grandkids will pay a very heavy price. And I don't care whether he did it or not. The very fact that he doesn't have the wisdom to understand that as a judge is someone who judges things, who look at things and be able to come up with something. Remember the story of Solomon, who is presented with a very, very difficult situation. Two mothers, there is one child. Two mothers saying, that child is mine. And the judge had the wisdom to come up with a way to figure out whose real mother was that child belongs to. Now you have that judge who is currently impacting people's lives. That individual does not have enough wisdom to say, hey, stop, time out, let's clear this matter. Instead, here is what that judge did. Let's take a quick look at what that judge did. And tell me if you want that judge to be on the Supreme Court to look at matters that impact your lives, the lives of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, for generations to come. This is the individual who is going to rule in that matter. I am scared of that individual because that Brett Kavanaugh doesn't have the wisdom to sit on the Supreme Court. Let's take a look at what Brett Kavanaugh did. Let's take a look at what Brett Kavanaugh did when presented with the opportunity to defend himself. He shows no judgment, no decency. In fact, listening to Brett Kavanaugh, you feel that you're listening to a senator running for a political office. And that individual, I don't want on the Supreme Court. He is not fit to be on the Supreme Court. And I'm not saying that because of the accusation, which may well be a reason, because so far we have no idea. But his reaction shows no judgment. And a judge who cannot judge should not be on the Supreme Court justice. He is what Brett Kavanaugh did when presented with the opportunity to defend himself.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit. Less than 2 weeks ago, Dr. Ford publicly accused me of committing wrongdoing at an event more than 36 years ago when we were both in high school. The day after the allegation appeared, I told this committee that I wanted a hearing as soon as possible to clear my name. I demanded a hearing for the very next day. Unfortunately, it took the committee 10 days to get to this hearing. In those 10 long days, as was predictable and as I predicted, my family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed by vicious and false additional accusations. The behavior of several of the Democratic members of this committee at my hearing a few weeks ago was an embarrassment. But at least it was just a good old-fashioned attempt at borking. Those efforts didn't work. When I did at least okay enough at the hearings that it looked like I might actually get confirmed, a new tactic was needed. When it was needed, this allegation was unleashed and publicly deployed over Dr. Ford's wishes. And then, as no doubt was expected, if not planned, came a long series of false last-minute smears designed to scare me and drive me out of the process before any hearing occurred. This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus. The consequences will extend long past my nomination. The consequences will be with us for decades. This grotesque and coordinated character assassination will dissuade competent and good people of all political persuasions from serving our country. And as we all know, in the United States political system of the early 2000s, what goes around comes around.
Tell me this is the individual you would want to look at a case, any situation, as a judge. I know I wouldn't. The Supreme Court justice is the last stop. It's where we have this mindset that it's a number of wise people. 9 wise people who can sit down and hash out important matters which impact a whole nation. Now, no matter the reason you want Brett Kavanaugh, this is no wise individual. And because he has been a judge for that long, because he has been a judge and he has been impacting other people's life, and still all as of date does not show any wisdom, I would not for any reason in the world promote that guy to become a Supreme Court justice. He doesn't deserve it. He's not fit for it. We're not talking about his knowledge of the law. During the hearing, I heard a lot of conversation about he's a smart, intelligent, and so on. This is not anything to do with his knowledge of the law, with his experience. That has to do with being a judge who has the wisdom to judge. And he had the perfect opportunity to show that. The perfect opportunity fell on his lap. He didn't go and look for it. It fell on his lap. Now, it might as well be that maybe what he's saying is innocent. It's possible, but when we listen to Brett Kavanaugh at the confirmation hearing and later on last Thursday, would you say that individual has wisdom to be on the Supreme Court? Would you bet your life on that individual? What I saw, what I heard, is an enraged individual who feel that he's entitled to something that they're trying to take away from him. That's what I heard from Brett Kavanaugh. Not a wise man. Because you don't have to be, and it doesn't matter which political party you belong to. You find yourself in that predicament, the first thing that should come out, even you didn't have to wait for anybody to ask. The first thing that I would have done from home, I would have made a statement through a spokesperson and say, I demand today that whatever process is going on is stopped so that this investigation can be done to clear my name. That would have been the only statement I would have made. And that would have been wise. Do you realize in life, again, I'm not saying that Brett Kavanaugh did anything wrong, but one thing that I found in life, whenever someone is accused of something, the people who scream the loudest that didn't happen end up being proven wrong. I didn't make that up. Look it up. Take example of the people that have been accused for the past few months since the Me Too movement has started. The people who screamed the loudest that it didn't happen, it was a smear campaign that never happened. Those are the people who end up being proven wrong. So, Brett Kavanaugh, a judge without wisdom, does not fit in any court, is not suitable for any court. And it has nothing to do with accusation. It has to do with the fact that he doesn't have the wisdom to be a judge. He may have the knowledge, no argument there. He certainly has the knowledge. He's been in this field long enough for him to have not only acquired enough experience and knowledge from different aspects of that business, so nobody can argue about that. But Brett Kavanaugh does not fit, is not suited to be a judge. He shows very little judgment. Don't take my word for it. I'm going to show you another clip where Judge Kavanaugh was given opportunity. And that's what tells me that he is not fit to be a judge. Because he got opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Guess what? He let all of them go by. Even a simple individual. In fact, the minute I heard about that problem, I said, if before anything comes out, if I were to be Brett Kavanaugh, here's what I would have done. I would have done this, and that. Because first, I believe I didn't do anything wrong. Why try so hard to say that? Why not let it be proven? It's like, I want a hearing. I want a hearing. Give me a hearing. Trying very hard to say it. Let it be proven. Brett Kavanaugh suffers of tantrum that you would not expect from a judge. I asked for a hearing the next day. They didn't give me a hearing. Damn it! Damn it, I wanted a hearing. Why try so hard to say it? Let it be proven. Brett Kavanaugh is not suitable for a judge. It doesn't fit the character of a judge, and it has nothing to do with the accusation. He was provided opportunities when the accusation first came out. He was provided that opportunity. He was in the comfort of his home. He could have made that statement. He could have sat back as a judge, because that's what a judge is supposed to do. While people are in front of you talking about the situation, whatever, however complex that is, for you to be able to think things through. Now, here's a situation presented to you. You're in the comfort of your home, and then you hear about the accusation, and the first thing you say, I want a hearing. I want a hearing. And what makes it worse is the fact that Brett Kavanaugh, having served in the Bush administration and know how the process works, he knows what to ask for, and he could have. So we know Brett Kavanaugh does not fit to be a judge. He doesn't have the wisdom to be a judge, and he proves it from the very onset. Now let's take a look at something else that he did that clearly tells me that along the way, instead of showing he has the wisdom, he's showing that he is not qualified to be a judge. Take a listen.
And now, turn to Don McGahn and tell him it's time to get this done. An FBI investigation is the only way to answer some of these questions.
Stop the clock. This committee is running this hearing, not the White House, not Don McGahn, not even you as a nominee. We are here today because Dr. Ford asked for an opportunity here. I know you did too as well. In fact, maybe even before she did. We're here because people wanted to be heard from charges that they all thought were unfair, or activities like sexual assault was unfair. So I want to assure Senator Durbin, regardless of what you say to Senator Don McGahn, we're not suspending this hearing. Proceed to answer the question, or whatever, or if the gentleman...
I'll just say this. If you, Judge Kavanaugh, turn to Don McGahn and to this committee and say, for the sake of my reputation, my family name, and to get to the bottom of the truth of this, I am not going to be an obstacle to an FBI investigation, I would hope that all the members of the committee would join me in saying we're going to abide by your wishes and we will have that investigation.
I welcome whatever the committee wants to do, because I'm telling the truth.
I want to know what you want to do.
I'm telling the truth.
I want to know what you want to do, Judge.
I'm innocent. I'm innocent of this charge.
Then you're prepared for an FBI investigation?
They don't reach conclusions. You reach the conclusion,
No,
Senator.
but they do investigate questions.
I'm
And
innocent.
you can't have it both ways, Judge. You can't say here at the beginning,
I wanted a hearing.
moment,
Look,
I
this
welcome
thing-
any kind of investigation.
This
and
thing was
then
sprung
walk
on
away from
me.
this.
Thing was sprung at the last minute after being held by staff. You know.
Judge,
And I
if
called
there is
for
no
I called
truth
for a
to-
hearing immediately.
If there is no truth to her charges, the FBI investigation will show that. Are you afraid that they might not?
Come on, gee whiz.
The FBI does not reach. That's a phony question because the FBI doesn't reach conclusions.
So
they just provide the 302s. With 302s, so I can explain to people who don't know what that is. They just go and do what you're doing: ask questions and then type up a report. They don't reach the bottom line conclusion.
This morning, I asked Dr. Ford. I asked her about this incident where she ran into Mark Judge at a Safeway, and she said, "Sure, I remember. 6 or 8 weeks after this occurrence." Well, someone at the Washington Post went in and took a look at Mr. Judge's book and has been able to, the run that he wrote about his addiction and his alcoholism. And they have narrowed it down what they think was a period of time, 6 or 8 weeks after the event. And he would have been working at the Safeway at that point. So the point I'm getting to is we at least can connect some dots here and get some information. Why would you resist that kind of investigation? Why would you resist that kind of investigation?
Senator, I wanted the hearing last week.
I'm asking about the FBI investigation.
The committee figures out how to ask the questions. I'll do whatever. I've been on the phone multiple times with committee counsel. I'll talk to
Judge Kavanaugh. Will you support an FBI investigation right now?
I will do whatever the committee wants to.
Personally, do you think that's the best thing for us to do? You want to answer?
As you saw on the clip, Brett Kavanaugh behavior is not just worrisome, because I can assure you, if anybody was to be on his court and behave that way, that person would have been thrown out of the court or be considered cited for contempt. Brett Kavanaugh does not have the temperament. Brett Kavanaugh is not fit to be a judge. Even where it is at today, he is affecting other people's life, all the while without the judgment, without the temperament to make good judgment. I can say with high degree of certainty that Brett Kavanaugh doesn't have the judgment to be a judge. He proves that publicly. He had proven it over and over and over again. The accusation helps expose that very fact about Judge Kavanaugh, that he doesn't have the temperament to be a judge. He could be the most qualified individual in the nation, in the world even. I have had professors in college who are brilliant, reputation-wise, but for the life of, they cannot teach to save their lives. They can pass information, read books and do those kind of things, but in terms of presenting in such a way to capture the audience, the student in that case, they cannot do that. Judge Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, is not fit to be a judge. He just doesn't have it. You can tell me he graduated college XYZ. You can tell me he was the top of his class. You can tell me he had years of experience. All that, I don't doubt it a second. But he doesn't have the wisdom to be a judge, much less so to be put on the Supreme Court. He just doesn't have it. During the confirmation hearing, which I didn't provide any clip, he has proven to be that person. Now, those clips that I provided to you earlier have to do with the Thursday hearing, during which time that Christine Blasey Ford, the woman who accused Judge Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her, she showed a much higher level of wisdom and temperament, calm, to present her case. And then you have a judge, someone who is ruling on people's lives, who is ruling on matters that impact people's lives. And this is the individual you want to place on the Supreme Court. I'll let you see another clip of an exchange between Judge Kavanaugh and Amy Klobuchar. Another exchange that should give you pause and say, what the hell are the Republicans fighting so much to put that individual on the Supreme Court? He's just not qualified for that. Not experience-wise, but he doesn't have the judgment, the wisdom to be placed on a court, the highest court in the land, in where we're expecting the individuals that are there, those individuals are wise people, can come up with an outcome that say, yes, those people are wise. Brett Kavanaugh is not such person. And I can tell you, he's not going to become that person. Because you have to have the temperament, and you have to have, you cannot just drop seed everywhere, anywhere, and expect it to grow. Because he has been in that business long enough for him to have acquired a temperament worthy of being a judge. And if it's not happening today, the Supreme Court is not going to change that. Brett Kavanaugh is a lost case. And for that, we cancel Brett Kavanaugh as a nominee for the Supreme Court. Let's take another look at an exchange with Amy.
I've done some drinking in high school and college, and many people even struggle with alcoholism and binge drinking. My own dad struggled with alcoholism most of his life, and he got in trouble for it, and there were consequences. He is still in AA at age 90, and he's sober. And in his words, he was pursued by grace, and that's how he got through this. So in your case, you have said here and other places that you never drank so much that you didn't remember what happened. But yet, we have heard, not under oath, but we have heard your college roommates say that you did drink frequently. These are in news reports, that you would sometimes be belligerent. Another classmate said it's not credible for you to say you didn't have memory lapses. So drinking is one thing.
I actually don't think that's the second quote's correct. On the first quote, if you wanted, I provided some material that's still redacted about the situation with the freshman year roommate. And I don't really want to repeat that in a public hearing, but just so you know, there were 3 people in a room, Dave White, Jamie Roach, and me, and it was a contentious situation where Jamie did not like Dave White at all, and I mean this.
Okay.
So Dave White came back from home one weekend, and Jamie Roach had moved all his furniture out into the courtyard. Okay. And so he walks in, and so that's your source on that. Okay. So there's some old.
Drinking is one thing.
And there's much more. Okay. Look at the redacted portion of what I said. I don't want to repeat that in a public hearing.
I will. Could I just ask one more question?
Redacted information about that.
Okay. Drinking is one thing, but the concern is about truthfulness. And in your written testimony, you said sometimes you had too many drinks. Was there ever a time when you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened or part of what happened the night before?
No, I remember what happened, and I think you've probably had beers, Senator, and So
you're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
You're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
Okay, thank you.
If you watch that video exchange between Amy and Brett, you should cringe at what just happened. Number one, if you were paying close attention, Brett was looking at the Republican men to see their reaction, to see how they would behave in terms of how he should answer the question, because he was gauging whether he should even answer the question. I don't know about you, but by God, would you want that individual? Now, you may be thinking about it today for yourself. How about your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids? Would you want, and that guy is going to be, if confirmed, on the Supreme Court for generations to come. Would you want your kids, your grandkids, to be impacted by that one? By Brett Kavanaugh? Brett Kavanaugh is not fit as a judge. He doesn't have the judgment. He doesn't have the temperament. He doesn't have the decency. He doesn't have the wisdom of a judge. So Brett Kavanaugh should not be a judge. And for that, we cancel Brett Kavanaugh as the next justice in the Supreme Court. We'll be right back. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America
is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore.
I thank you to have taken the time to watch our program, which comes every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. We hope it was educational, informative, and important for the well-being of our nation. We hope to see you next time. Have a great afternoon.